character has, the more it seems sort of like an Adam figure, maybe even a Moses in certain senses, in that it's a magician. It's putting its stamp on the community. It's got its own harem, which you could look at as its own sanctuary of initiates and concubines that it's working its magic through. And so there, I think, are a lot of sexual magic connections to what Freud is describing as the primal family. And when we look at this, we can say, okay, does the magician, in a certain sense, aspire to return to this sort of primal father where he puts his stamp on the world and he controls the universe through his sexual energy and through his domination, genetically as well as magically? What is that really about? How is that determined, and where does that really come from? So, again, I mean, I think that's something that gives people a lot of things to think about.
Well, in one of your posts, you were saying that when people see this kind of this primal father, or this, I guess, kind of like this overman, this leader, they're strangely attracted to him because he has something that they're lacking, like this vitality, this
right.
other
and
aspect.
Exactly.
But the other thing he has is no concern for the other. He's completely self-confident and self-capable. He doesn't need the approval of the group. Right.
And he seduces people in the group either through a sort of purity of aspiration, which entices people and intoxicates them, and also through a strength of will and purpose, which is greater than their own. I mean, in these sorts of situations, people are coming from their own position of wills that have been completely collectivized. They can't put themselves first. They can't prioritize their own needs and values. And, we see this in the OTO of people who can't kind of separate their own personal agenda out from the group. And then they see somebody who's completely independent and has this sort of erotic domination over others, either through the purity of their own aspiration or because they represent, in Nietzschean terms, a higher being, who at the same time often seems immoral. I mean, Nietzsche points out that real pagans in his own philosophy posits higher beings who are beyond good and evil and therefore immoral. And not amoral, he says immoral, which I think is a significant distinction because people try to get around that, but that's really what he's saying. So this darkly, seductive character has a kind of effect on followers, and there's almost an erotic submission of their will to this person. And all political leaders, to a certain extent, exert this kind of libidinal fascination over their followers. And this is, something that Freud thought really informed all group psychology. And so we can start analyzing occult groups and occult histories to see, are there really strong libidinal connections between the leaders and the followers, and between the followers and each other? And what's fascinating to me about this is that magic, like Freudian psychoanalysis, makes an attempt to sort of make this libidinal connection obvious. And gnosis is, in a lot of ways, coming to a realization of how it's really there. And so in both magic and Freudian analysis, there's an attempt to make this latent, secret, libidinal fire or primal connection obvious. And gnosis is when you come to the knowledge of that, and it's sort of similar to psychoanalysis. The difference is that I think Crowley really sought at one point to master this force and to explain it scientifically and to study it, whereas I think at a certain crucial point, psychoanalysis turned away from that. They sort of retreated away from embracing that pure libidinal energy and saw it as being two-sided. There's a threatening element to it, there's an aggressive element to it, as well as a profoundly beautiful one. And that, to me, is where you start looking at real gods who have both light and dark sides to them. And most of the time people just want God to be, or the higher beings to be good, and like Mr. Rogers, who love them just the way they are, and this is their their desire. But instead, the more political figures I think are like this, the more they lose that essential libidinal energy.
Right. It just seems the same thing with God. I mean, even if you look at Judeo-Christianity, I mean, the original God of the Jews was the God who made good and who made evil, who did,
right.
Great things for the people and also punished them,
right.
mercilessly because they did not follow the commandment or whatever.
Right.
Whereas the God of today is all love and happiness and joy and is easy to forget about because there's just no...
Right, and it's not sexy. I mean, this is the thing that Freud, I think, would say about why fundamentalist churches, and Crowley points this out, too, in the commentaries, as you know, that fundamentalist Christian churches that are unafraid of presenting the dark side of God, the judgmental side, the side that most, liberal humanists don't like, are the ones that get people going. That's the ones that get people's enthusiasm because that libidinal energy is there.
Right.
It dissipates.
Phelps is right up there. I mean, he's got like virtually no following, but he's so full of energy and he's so out there that people pay attention.
Right. Exactly. And that that primal father is in a lot of ways the primal force, the primal embodiment of this libidinal tantric energy that's in magic. And a lot of people, are worried about what that force is going to get up to. And they have every right to worry about it because it is inherently threatening and destabilizing and apocalyptic. Too bad.
But but the way you describe it, it very much sounds like that's where Crowley was trying to get people to be. He was trying to get, the kings to be that kind of person, to embrace the good and the bad, to be amoral, to not need the other, and to be self-satisfied and self-confident. And
well, look at his critique of morality that runs, explicitly throughout the commentaries and in other places. He's very upfront about it. I think at one point he says, to hell with the moral principle. It makes men cattle. And you can find that line in the unedited commentaries on the Book of the Law. And this is, of course, the thing that, frightens a lot of people in the OTO. They don't like that because they're trying to keep some sort of morality on top of the will to keep it from getting up to naughty things. And that's, as soon as they do that, they sort of cut off the energy and it stops being interesting.
Right. It's the same thing where he says, most people are cattle, and the kings should not be afraid of using them for their mutton and wool.
Right. Well, they have that collectivized will that Freud is pointing to, that they're not ever going to be able to escape their fears and their need for reinforcement from others. And again, this is sort of, to me, where Freud and Nietzsche hook up together and seem very similar. And of course, this is not what I think the dominant psychoanalytic model is in the United States anymore, because it's seeking to avoid these unhappy making kind of ideas.
So where do you see this going? Do you see this kind of creating kind of a bifurcation within groups? You have those who are attracted to the individual who has this self-confidence, this libidinal energy that is attractive to others, and then those who are attracted to it. Is that, where you see the Thelemic community breaking up, or?
Well, it could happen that way. I mean, I think it helps people to look at their own relationships, and especially in guru yoga. If you've been attracted to a guru, if you've worked with a guru, if you've submitted to guru yoga and really tried to work it, you have to look at the libidinal component that's there. And some of my teachers have pointed back to Plato's Symposium, where Alcibiades, in the course of that dialogue, reveals that it's Socrates' purity that attracts him. That Socrates is seen as a pure individual who ultimately, the purity of his own aspiration is the thing that draws Alcibiades to him. And studying that particular document shows how guru yoga really works in a lot of ways. So I would recommend that people think about that. Again, Crowley himself was definitely one of these seductive, dark powers who seduced people with his erotic domination, and I think this is one of the things that people complained the most about him about when he was alive, was that he was going around doing this to people. And there will be people in the OTO who are more or less successful in imitating him when it comes to this. The problem is often that they just sort of do it for its own sake. I mean, this is kind of my critique of the Temple of Set. It's a hierarchical satanic organization that exists to be a hierarchical satanic organization. At least it seems that way to me, that just the higher purpose there doesn't always seem easily grasped. Whereas, if you just want to go around and form your own little Charlie Manson cult, we've seen a lot of people do that too, and it doesn't last very long. It has to be part of a larger aspiration, a larger sort of agenda. And that's really what's going to make something work in the long run, not these sorts of little cults of personality, which I think you and I have observed over the time that we've been involved in the occult community. They come and go.
Yes, very much. I've also noticed kind of a correlation here. If a leader emerges because he has this libidinal energy that people are attracted to, the converse is if if he loses it, he'll lose the attraction. He'll lose his followers.
Sure. Yeah, people will not be turned on anymore, and they'll go looking for something that will turn them on.
I think that's happening in a lot of cases in the OTO right now.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it's too bad. But I think it's part of what's going to happen if, the leadership of the organization is sort of dedicated to this middle-class church idea of, sort of Gnostic Presbyterianism where, everybody comes in and it's very sedate and, it's not very sexy to people. I mean, look at the recent Magical Link. Is that really a sexy, challenging document? Or
you mean the Magical Link? Agape.
The Agape, right. And this is sort of my kind of concern is that when the OTO or when any magical group stops being sexy, people will go looking for one that is. And that, to me, is kind of the issue. Is it really invested in continuing this sort of libidinal energy, or is that energy too threatening to the pre-existing values of the people who are in it, and are they sort of working to undermine their own libidinal authority and their own power in that sense? And I've often seen that be the case, but I could be wrong.
What was the name of that book that you were reading again?
Well, I'm reading right now Freud, The Mind of the Moralist by Philip Reif. The Freud text that I recommend people looking at to start out with is Totem and Taboo, which I think is really important in terms of Tantra. Freud's book on group psychology and The Future of an Illusion, Civilization and Its Discontents. That has a lot about religion in it and Freud's take on that. A lot of the Freud is a lot easier to read than people think. I was really surprised because I'd read him in college and I didn't really remember how easy he was to understand and how simple a lot of the ideas were just to read. They have complex, follow-up, but it's not a trial to read these books. You don't need to have a sort of dumbed-down version of Freud handed to you. You can actually just read the original text. You don't need some cheesy, beginner book guide.
Right.
Don't want to insult any of your other guests, but,
I understand. Well, thanks again. I'm glad you came on to let people know about this, and I hope it's an
interesting direction. I mean, it's a direction I think that it might be rewarding for folks to look at.
Yeah, and especially since, recently we've had a number of people talk about psychological aspects of magic. This is a completely different take on it. So I think that's great.
Right. Well, my desire always is to bring up the most unhappy-making truth possible.
Well, maybe you've done that here, maybe not. We'll have to see what people say.
Okay.
Thanks again. 93.
93, John.
I want to thank Keith for being on the podcast again. I always find his segments interesting and challenging, so I hope people enjoy them. Lastly, we're going to move on to the interview with Lon DuQuette. He has recently released a new book called Accidental Christ, and the one previous to that was called The Key to Solomon's Key. Both are now available. The Accidental Christ is a hardcover, and The Key to Solomon's Key is a paperback. This interview was recorded about a week and a half ago. I had anticipated releasing this podcast actually just at the beginning of February, but due to a number of circumstances, it was delayed. So some of the references that Lon makes to some of the events that he's doing is because I was anticipating releasing this sooner. So unfortunately, some of them have passed. But DuQuette is still doing a number of talks through the year. So I will have a link to his website, and you can go there to find out his schedule. So either way, here is Lon DuQuette talking about his books, Accidental Christ and The Key to Solomon's Key.
We have on the phone with us Lon DuQuette. Welcome to the podcast, Lon. 93.
93, John.
Now, you've been busy lately having a few books. Your most recent book to be released is The Key to Solomon's Key, and then you also have a book coming out in the next week called Accidental Christ. Let's start with The Key to Solomon's Key since that's out.
Okay.
What is that book about in general?
That book is I wanted to start with, the Lesser Key of Solomon and give sort of an extended commentary on Goetia and such. That was my original intent. But as I started to develop the book, I started to explore the character of King Solomon, because this is Solomonic magic after all. And I joined the Masons, about 8 years ago. And I enjoyed I enjoy being a Mason. It's an okay